Welcome to this edition of the AKTTAP webinar series. This webinar is presented by Brett Nelson of the Natural Resources Conservation Service, Alaska. And he will be presenting on support the NRCS has for subsistence, trails, and conservation in Alaska. Feel free to raise your hand or post questions in chat or the Q&A pod as things go along. Thank you. And Brett, it's off to you.
All right, thanks, Vicki. So, hello, everyone. As Vicki mentioned, my name is Brett Nelson. I'm the State Conservation Engineer for USDA-NRCS here in Alaska. Actually, I want to, I'll do a little bit more in-depth introduction of the agency probably at the start of my presentation. But I really want to kick things off today with a short video that we made about a trail project we've been working on in Hooper Bay in conjunction with Sea Lion Corporation. So we'll start with that, and then we'll follow that up with the PowerPoint presentation. So give me a second.
We used to have wooden bowls, and we called them conduct. You could also call it plate. So the land around here is our plate, our banquet.
This is a Yupik community out in the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, and they practice a subsistence lifestyle. So being able to live out here and live off the land this is who they are as a people. Not only is that a critical and important part of their culture, but it's also economically important.
My favorite thing about Hooper Bay is subsisting. It's very important. It's been a way of life for centuries.
This area is incredibly remote. It's considered off the road system for Alaska. The only way in or out is by barge or plane. So the vast majority of the population out here is reliant on subsistence lifestyles out into the tundra.
If you see the prices in our stores, they're probably higher than anywhere else in the United States.
As you can imagine, in the grocery store, the prices reflect how hard it is to get supplies, equipment, food to this region in Alaska.
So any goods that are available here in town either come in by barge during the short few summer months or by plane during the winter months. So as you might expect, things can be very expensive. To the extent that the local citizens can subsist off the land is very important. And so from there, we walked out across the tundra with them, and they showed us the damaged areas where their traditional subsistence activities occur. But ultimately, there was just a lot of ATV traffic on the tundra, and this happens to be in a world-class nesting habitat for some threatened and endangered species.
Over 20 years ago, our elders here became concerned. They foresaw the destructive costs of ATVs on the bird nesting areas. And some of the stories goes that, you know, some of the elders sent out their grandchildren out to collect some of the shorebird eggs for them to eat
the grandchildren would report back to their grandparents that the ATVs have run over not only on the fauna, but also the destruction of the habitat of the wildlife.
When they approached us with this project, that was their concern. They were concerned about future generations, the stability of being able to live a subsistence lifestyle out here. And they were concerned that the habitat was being damaged and that would have an impact on their people in the future.
ATVs can get stuck. The land is undulating. It is very, very wet. When you walk out, you will sink in several inches, if not more. And so having the boarded walkway is so valuable.
The Hooper Bay Trail Project. We provided some of the funding for this project through our EQIP program, and EQIP is that's our Environmental Quality Incentives Program, which is a program that is offered through the Farm Bill. We use the EQIP program pretty extensively in Alaska.
This project will connect the village itself out to the shore to help with subsistence lifestyles for the people in the region.
This trail actually belongs to Sea Lion Corporation and the citizens of Hooper Bay. It's their project. We just provided technical assistance and some financial assistance to help get it installed.
It's been good. No problem at all. I've been working, I'd say about going on 5 years now since we started. From behind the windmills, that's where we started from all the way up to over here. Well, I'm sure it helps a lot of people in our village. With me, I just use it for subsistence or using this trail to get to the beach to gather your woods for the winter.
I am constantly amazed at the things that are done here in Alaska, kind of at the end of the road, so to speak, if not off of it entirely.
Many different villages are interconnected. The NRCS, they try to take part in our lifestyle. That's very different from other agencies. They spent time with us and they brought the community together and they wanted input from everyone. We asked the people that were using the land what areas were important and why they were going out.
And so from there, it was kind of a joint effort. We used our engineering expertise to kind of plan a stable route, and they used their traditional knowledge expertise to make sure that the route we were planning was staying in the vicinity of the places they needed to go.
And that is how we developed where the shortened trail is now at. It's not arbitrary. It's based on input that we got, and that's how we got that trail marked out.
Oh yeah, there's a light coming right at us. The tundra has been healing rapidly. It's incredible how much it can heal itself just over the course of a year once the traffic gets pulled off of it.
With the boardwalk, it's so much easier to be out there, and you could bring children too. We look forward to going out every year now because it's something we learned and grew up with, and my grandmother and my mother taught me. I taught my daughter, and now I'm teaching my grandchildren the ways of gathering and picking. So much, much better than what it was before.
All right. So I wanted to start with that video. And I think that does a pretty good job of giving everybody a little bit of an idea of the types of trail projects we can get involved with, and the reasons for those projects, and some of the supporting needs. So as I mentioned at the start, my name is Brett Nelson. I work with NRCS, Natural Resources Conservation Service, which is an agency within the USDA here in Alaska. And maybe some of you probably haven't heard of NRCS in the past. So I can tell you in general, what we do is we do voluntary conservation on private lands. The NRCS mission is we deliver conservation solutions so agricultural producers can protect natural resources and feed a growing world. And it's important to note here that here in Alaska, subsistence is considered agricultural. So that is an important detail, as it's the qualifying factor for NRCS assistance. The NRCS vision is a world of clean and abundant water, healthy soils, resilient landscapes, and thriving agricultural and rural communities through voluntary conservation. And I mention this just because I think that's something that probably a lot of people here can relate to. So we're here to talk about trails, particularly trails that have problems or are causing resource concerns. So I wanted to start by showing just a simple example. This is a trail that, from our perspective, is actually in great shape. If you have trails that look like this, we would consider there to be no resource concerns associated with this, or at least no apparent ones. It is possible there's some habitat issues, but generally, I'm sure a lot of people would be happy if their trails looked like they were in this kind of shape. This is more commonly what we see when we get out and about. I'm sure everybody's familiar with when you try and ride an ATV out across the tundra, after a few trips across, the ground can start to get soft, the plants can get dislodged, and it starts to get real easy to get stuck. So you always steer your ATV out and around those problematic spots, and the trail becomes braided and starts to really cause some trouble, for habitat, for erosion, for several things. So I think this picture is a great illustration of classic trail problems. Here's another example. I'm sure many of you have seen something like this. Obviously, ATV traffic has stripped the vegetation here. We have soil erosion ongoing, you can see in the foreground. Another example, again, just repeated ATV use on sensitive ground, and then it starts to become more and more problematic to get through, and causes resource concerns, habitat fragmentation, erosion, possible water quality issues, amongst others. I wanted to show this slide just to give you an example. The entire trail doesn't have to be degraded or having resource concerns in order for us to potentially provide technical or financial assistance. This would be an example here where chunks of this trail, which are hard to see in the picture, are in fine shape and not a problem, but there are local areas where there are issues. And so things like this can be spot treated, and improve things for everybody, including the resources. One last photo of typical problems we see when we're out and about. As I mentioned on the previous slide, so NRCS can provide both technical and potentially financial assistance. And by technical assistance, I mean, we can work with a landowner in the field. We can walk the property and try and take a look at what the problems are. what the landowner's objectives are, what they would like to see changed or fixed. And that's what we call our technical assistance. We'll write a conservation plan and do some engineering designs if needed, or other practice designs on things that might be able to mitigate the resource concerns and help the landowner implement their conservation objectives. So once we have a conservation plan written, it's then up to the landowner or the cooperator, if they are interested in financial assistance to apply some of the practices. They can apply for, most commonly it would be our EQIP program, EQIP, and that stands for Environmental Quality Incentives Program. You saw some of that on the video. EQIP is one of our Farm Bill programs, and by far the most commonly used of the Farm Bill programs for NRCS here in Alaska. To qualify for the EQIP program, we need to meet both producer eligibility and land eligibility. Federally recognized tribes and tribal entities do qualify as ag producers and do meet producer eligibility. Private individuals also qualify if they are involved in ag production. And as I mentioned earlier, subsistence is considered ag production in Alaska. Land eligibility. We work on private land, voluntary conservation on private land. The program is typically not applicable on federal, state, or other public land, although there are some limited exceptions if the bulk of the project benefit is to private land, but there's some incidental use of public land or impacts to public land. Sometimes that can be accommodated. So I mentioned that we do provide technical assistance, and as part of that, engineering design assistance. So these next couple slides are just examples of the professional quality engineering plans that you would receive once the design was completed. And these plans will govern the installation of the trail. So you can see there's a lot of detail on here. But this is something that NRCS will do these designs, and NRCS will present the design to you for construction to make sure there's no questions or answer any questions. And we'll also provide technical assistance during construction if needed. If you need some technical expertise in the field on laying out where the piles are installed or things like that. Those are some things that NRCS can assist with. So in the past, we've dabbled with various types of trail construction. We still do. Where gravel is available, a gravel trail can be a great option. That's commonly not available in the area, as I'm sure most of you are aware. We have done some work with porous pavement type trails. Haven't had a lot of great success with that. There are instances where it can be applicable, but certainly on very wet, sensitive areas, that has not worked well for us. So in recent years, we have adopted more, the two types of trails we most commonly do now are mudsill boardwalk and helical pile supported boardwalk. And what you see here in this slide is some helical pile stockpiled in the village, getting ready for installation. Here we see additional trail materials that have been offloaded by the barge in the village, and these now need to be transported to the trail site to get ready for installation. Most of what you see here is decking boards, but some of them are also some of the supporting beams or mud sills. This is pressure treated lumber, so that we can get substantial lifespan from these trail projects, and they're not constantly in need of major maintenance. So Here's an example of a mud sill supported trail under construction. And you can see here, your first question might be, you see the slide and you say, it's like, well, gee, this ground looks like it's in great shape. Why do we need a trail here? This is a little bit of a reroute. The torn up area, we decided it would be better ground to build the trail in this area, which is a few hundred feet away from where the current trail is. The trail will be more stable this way. But you can see the ground's in pretty good shape here. It's reasonably dry and reasonably level. And this is why the mud sill concept will work here. We like to use mud sill instead of pile supported trail when possible, as it's simply much less expensive. So when it will work, that is the better choice, but we do use the pile when it's necessary. So just another view of a pile supported boardwalk, or not pile, mud sill boardwalk. You will note that this trail is not very high off the ground, and that is on purpose. It's always best when we can keep the trail as close to the ground as possible. But by keeping it a little bit off the ground, we don't end up with pumping problems and displacing some of the silty soils with traffic going over the trail. So, but this is under 12 inches in height, which is why there's not a safety railing on this trail. And so it just keeps the installation as simple as possible and the trail usability as simple as possible. One more photo of a mud sill trail. You'll note that at the curve there, the trail is slightly widened. That's to accommodate the tracking differential you'll see in any vehicle, including ATVs, when they are making a curve or a corner. And you'll notice we're crossing a little bit of a tide gut out in the distance there in this photo. And so you can see the piles under the trail. That section of the trail is pile supported, partly to control grade, but also it's just the better technical solution for that situation to allow adequate water to pass under the trail as needed. So jumping over to the pile supported trail, we use helical piles instead of driven piles for this typically. And those piles can be set generally with relatively small equipment. Small excavators or skid steers are most commonly used. And in this slide, you see the crew setting some piles to use for pre-production testing purposes. We need to test the load-bearing capacity of the piles. That's part of the process. So here you see an actual test being conducted, applying load to the pile to verify how much it moves under a given load. And so what we're doing here is, as these piles are installed in the ground, there is a gauge on the equipment that reads how many foot-pounds of force are being applied to install that pile. And that gauge, that force will vary as the pile gets deeper and deeper or into different materials. The force goes up when you're in gravel, it goes down when you're in silt, it goes way up if you're in permafrost, things like that. And so we can correlate the torque needed to put a pile in with the bearing capacity of that pile. And as an example, in the Hooper Bay area where we've done some of these trails, 1,500 foot-pounds of torque translates to approximately 7,500 pounds of pile bearing capacity. So here you see actual piles being installed for the trail. In the background, you can see that some trail has been built already, and then in the foreground here, piles are being installed. You'll note this is being done in the winter. The ground out here is very wet. and has very little bearing capacity. So we can't get even like tracked skid steers out on this ground well in the summer months when the ground is thawed. It just won't support. So the piles are typically installed in the winter. That could vary from site to site depending on the site conditions. So here's just a few more slides that show trail under construction. Again, what you're seeing here is pile supported trail. And again, typically for pile supported trail, what we've seen in the places we've done this, a crew of 3 folks, 3 workers kind of to set the piles, and then a separate crew of 3 to 5 additional workers actually doing the superstructure work or the timber work for the beams and the decking and the railing. You can see starting to get into the railing construction here. Here's an example of a turnout under construction. So depending on the level of traffic for the trail, every 500 feet, 800 feet, 1,000 feet, kind of depends on site distances and amount of traffic on the trail. But we'll do a turnout or a parking area, which you see in this photo, so that if 2 ATVs have to meet going opposite directions, somebody can pull off to the side and let the other folks by. Or maybe this is in the vicinity of where somebody wanted to go egging or berry picking. And so they can just pull off here and park their ATV, and then there'll be a ramp down to the tundra, and they can walk out from here to do their subsistence activities. Here's a photo of finished construction, pile supported trail. And this is at a turnout or parking section. You will note this is more of a turnout section instead of a parking section. Apparently there's no normal subsistence activities that occur right in this vicinity. Otherwise there would be like a set of ramps going down from the trail down to the tundra here. But apparently this isn't a common area where people want to park and take off walking. So here's just a little bit of a different view. You can see the piles a little better under the trail here. Piles are every 8 feet on center. That can vary design by design, but that's what the typical design we have for right now. We do the trail design in most areas to accommodate loaded ATV traffic, which is a 1,250 pound load, in addition to wind loads and snow loads being applied. So that's all taken into account. We can do heavier trails if needed. If UTVs are more the norm in an area, then this trail design would need to be widened a little bit and beefed up a little bit. And that can also be accommodated when necessary. But most places, ATVs are the more common, at least for heading out and doing the subsistence activities in the villages we've worked with so far. Here's just an aerial view. And again, this is at Hooper Bay. You can see the constructed trail here. You can also see a lot of the damaged areas from ATV traffic. And I just wanted to point out here that this is shortly after this section of trail was completed. So that torn up ground that you see has mostly healed over at this point. It takes a year or 2 for the tundra to kind of reestablish grass and berries and other plants on those disturbed sites. But it does heal relatively quickly. It just doesn't look like it in this photo because this is shortly after construction. So typical project timeframes. Let me jump one more slide here. So how do you go about requesting assistance from NRCS? Well, here's a map of the NRCS offices and the NRCS teams across the state, along with contact names and phone numbers. By far the largest area of the state where most people viewing this video are probably from is going to be in the North Team area. And the contact there is Elizabeth Bazink at the number shown. But just reach out to NRCS if you are interested and make contact. We will schedule employees to come out and visit and walk the ground with you and determine what sort of problems there are and kind of get some information from you on landowner objectives and what are you trying to achieve. We'll do any surveying needed, and ultimately that'll turn into a conservation plan and potentially an engineering design if the trail is appropriate. And then from there, if things look good and you like like what's presented in the conservation plan and the engineering design, you can then apply for EQIP assistance, that's a competitive program. So it's not automatic that funding will be available. But historically in Alaska, the competition hasn't been really difficult. And each state gets an allocation. So it's not like a national level competition where it can be really difficult to get funded. So historically, we stand a pretty reasonable chance of getting a project funded in Alaska. If by chance a year passes, it's a competitive year and you don't get funded, likely the next year things will work out. So with that, I know that is just a very high level synopsis, but I think with some of the photos and with the video, you can get a pretty good idea of the types of assistance NRCS can provide. We obviously do more things than just trails, but today's presentation, we wanted to focus on subsistence trails and things that can be that we might be able to provide assistance on. So with that, I will open it up for questions.
So, well, thank you, Brett. Anybody who has a question, either raise your hand or post a question in either the chat or the question and A pod. And give it a minute or two here. Okay, yes, we have. All right, Nathan, you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
All right. Hi, my name is Nathan Williams. I'm the roads director here in AKTTAP, and the slideshow that just passed, the NRCS, I couldn't tell if I was for the west or north region.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry.
about 28 miles away from Bethel, upriver.
Excellent. Thanks for the question, Nathan. That's a good one. You are in the north area, so Elizabeth is definitely your contact. We are familiar with the AKTTAP village. You might be aware NRCS is the agency that helped relocate some of the houses away from the eroding riverbank in AKTTAP, and we have worked with folks in AKTTAP in the past. So.
Oh yeah, I seen that on the tundra area where you guys were building like bridges. There's a couple bridges that I'd want somebody to come, I mean locations for a bridge. It's towards the new housing area, and there's 2 roads that I'd like to make, but I think that they need some kind of bridge. Maybe culverts and a lot of gravel, I'm not sure.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for the information. Feel free to reach out to Elizabeth and get somebody scheduled to come out and take a look. One thing that I did forget to mention in my presentation that is an important detail is the EQIP program that we use for this. as I mentioned, it is a farm bill program, and so the agricultural nexus is important. So a trail that's used for like to go out and do subsistence activities is something that can typically be eligible. The main roads, like the road right in the village to go to the store or go to the airport or go to the housing development, that typically would not be eligible for this program. But it doesn't mean that we might not be able to. We do have some other programs that may be able to help to some degree, but it's not as promising a situation as a subsistence trail.
Oh yeah, the subsistence trail we got right now is just behind the village, and maybe some trees would need to be sawed down and moved off the way. And usually we wait till the river's frozen over and there's a lot more subsistence trails across the river. So do you think it would be a good idea to maybe get some chainsaws and some laborers to kind of make room on the subsistence trails?
Well, I probably would need to actually see the situation on the ground. Typically, if you're needing to cut down trees or brush, that tells me there's probably not people probably aren't able to get through there right now, which probably means there's not a resource concern, which would be one of the requirements for NRCS. If it's just to establish new access, that would be a problem for us probably. However, if the situation is the old subsistence trail is just so degraded to the point where you can't pass it anymore, so you need to cut a new trail and get a new trail installed, so that the old site can be rehabilitated, that might be a possibility. And we could certainly do a visit out to AKTTAP to take a look at things in the summer and see what we thought and talk about the situation with you, Nathan, if you're interested.
All right. It's just the main trails, but sometimes it gets pretty windy, like fall time, and some trees just go over and people have to like duck their heads, or maybe some people saw woods down on their own, but I'm not really sure. I'm not out there every day.
Okay. All right,
Thanks.
thank you, Nathan. Brett, there's a question posted in chat as to will you provide a copy of the PowerPoint presentation?
I certainly can do that, yes.
Yeah, if you send me a PDF, I can link it to the information on the webinar that will exist on the TTAP website. So that would be available. And then another question for you is, does the USFWS have the final say on building on refuge land, or how do we go around that issue?
Yeah, so great question. And that definitely came up out at Hooper Bay. As I mentioned, private land is the primary focus for NRCS, but certainly trails are long linear things, and so it's unlikely that you're going to stay on a single piece of private land for a whole trail. So, like in the case of Hooper Bay, Fish and Wildlife definitely was consulted. They definitely had to grant their permission for the trail in any areas where it was on their land. But they were very interested. They were concerned about the habitat damage from the ATVs just driving across the refuge lands. So they were generally, in that case, they were on board with construction of the trail, so that the ATV traffic would stay on the trail and not drive over the nests.
All right, so any other questions? Okay, then. Thank you very much, Brett, for coming and presenting today. It was appreciated. I'm going to stop the recording.